Jamal Carter is just a 25-year-old taxi driver trying to make ends meet with night shifts in Seattle. A minor traffic violation is enough for two young white officers to turn his compliance into handcuffs, pain, and public humiliation. Beaten and gagged, Jamal faces a choice that will divide the city: remain silent or fight back and risk being branded a bad guy. When his case goes to court, the real question isn't who broke the law, but who broke the law before. Before we begin, let us know in the comments. Where are you watching from today? And if you believe that justice always prevails and that justice is where there is no injustice, then this story is for you. Seattle breathed in a thin, steady rain that night, the kind that never fully fell, only hovered, soft as mist. Streetlights blurred into long streaks of red and blue across Rainier Avenue, reflected on wet asphalt like fresh scratches. The city was quiet in that uneasy way it gets after midnight, when most people are asleep and the rest are either working or hiding from something. Jamal Carter was working. At 25, Jamal was tall and lean, with the quiet strength of someone used to long hours and little praise. His skin was a deep brown, his face narrow with high cheekbones and tired but observant eyes. He kept his hair cropped short, not for style, but for convenience. People often described him as calm. Too calm, some said, as if stillness itself were a choice he had learned the hard way. He wore a faded navy taxi jacket, one sleeve stitched where it had torn months earlier. Inside the car, everything was clean but modest. Jamal believed order kept trouble away. He signaled right, slowing to let his passenger out near the curb. That was when the headlights flared behind him. Red. Blue. "Pull over!" The amplified voice cut through the rain. Jamal's chest tightened. Not panic. Experience. He eased the taxi to the side of the road and stopped. His hands rose slowly, deliberately, and settled on the steering wheel where they could be seen. He stared straight ahead, breathing evenly. He had learned the rules early. Move slow, speak soft, don't argue. Being a black man driving at night in Seattle meant questions came more often. He didn't complain about it out loud. Complaints didn't change things. Survival did. Two police officers stepped out of the cruiser. The first was Officer Madison Blake, 26, tall and athletic, with sharp shoulders and posture trained to command space. Her blonde hair was pulled tight beneath her cap, her jaw set as if she were always mid-decision. Madison believed deeply in authority, especially her own. Raised in a law enforcement family, she had learned early that hesitation was weakness. Beside her was Officer Aaron Walsh, 24, slightly shorter, slimmer, with a quick smile that rarely reached her eyes. Aaron had an easy confidence, the kind that came from never doubting she'd be believed. Where Madison was rigid, Aaron was casual, dangerous in a different way. They approached the taxi from both sides. Madison leaned toward the driver's window. Her eyes swept the interior as if already expecting to find something wrong. "You didn't signal back there," she said flatly. "Yes, ma'am," Jamal replied, keeping his voice level. "I did signal. Maybe it wasn't clear in the rain, but Don't argue," Aaron cut in from the passenger side, her tone light, almost amused. She tilted her head, smiling as if she'd just heard a bad joke. Jamal stopped speaking. "License and registration," Madison said. He reached slowly, narrating every movement the way his mother had taught him years ago. "My wallet's in my back pocket." Aaron leaned closer, intentionally loud so the body camera on her chest could catch every word. "You're shaking," she said. "Why are you nervous?" Jamal swallowed. "I'm not nervous, just—" "Careful. Careful people don't shake," Aaron replied, her smile widening. Madison took the documents, barely glancing at them. "Step out of the vehicle." Jamal paused for half a second, not refusal, just processing, then nodded. He opened the door and stepped into the rain. Cold drops hit his face, ran down his neck. The street smelled like wet concrete and exhaust. As he stood beside the car, Jamal reached instinctively toward his jacket pocket. Aaron reacted instantly, grabbing his arm. "What are you pulling out?" Madison snapped. "My phone," Jamal said quickly, "to notify dispatch. I'm a taxi driver." Before he could finish, Madison shoved him forward. The first push threw him off balance. The second slammed his back into the side of the taxi. Pain shot through his ribs. He gasped. Metal clicked. The handcuffs closed behind him, tight and unforgiving. Cold steel bit into his wrists. "Stop resisting," Aaron said, laughing softly. "I'm not resisting." Jamal strained, his voice cracking despite himself. Madison pointed a finger inches from his face. Her eyes were hard, unblinking. "One more move and you're going down." Rain ran down Jamal's forehead into his eyes. He stared at the pavement, jaw clenched. He tasted blood where he'd bitten his lip. Across the intersection, unnoticed by the officers, a traffic camera blinked steadily, capturing everything. Further down the block, an old man had stopped pushing his cart. Leon Pops Freeman was 63, though life had aged him faster. He was tall once, broad-shouldered from decades working the docks, but now his back curved slightly, his movements slower. His beard was gray and uneven, his coat frayed at the sleeves. Pops spoke little these days, not because he had nothing to say, but because he had learned no one listened. Tonight, he watched in silence. He had seen scenes like this before. Different faces. Same ending. Pops shook his head slowly, disbelief mixing with something older. Anger worn thin by repetition. "Again," he muttered. "Again." He turned his cart around and disappeared into the rain. Back at the taxi, Aaron tightened the cuffs just a little more. "Relax," she said. "You're doing this to yourself." Jamal winced, but said nothing. Madison spoke into her radio, voice calm and controlled. "We have a non-compliant subject." Non-compliant. The word settled into Jamal's chest heavier than the cuffs. As the cruiser door opened, Jamal glanced once at his taxi. Engine still running, blinker clicking uselessly into the rain. His livelihood, his routine, his quiet life. Then he was pushed forward again. The cruiser door slammed shut behind him, sealing the night in glass and steel. Rain continued to fall on Rainier Avenue, washing the street clean as if nothing had happened at all. By morning, Seattle no longer felt quiet. The rain had thinned into a gray drizzle, but the city buzzed with a restless energy, the kind that traveled faster than traffic and lingered longer than weather. Somewhere between sunrise and the first commute, a short clip from a traffic camera appeared online under a blunt headline. "Taxi driver arrested for turn signal." It was shaky, grainy, and incomplete. But it didn't need to be perfect to ignite something already dry. Within hours, the city split cleanly down the middle. One side called it procedure. The other called it abuse. On buses, in break rooms, on morning radio, people argued over the same 20 seconds of footage. Some slowed it down frame by frame. Others refused to watch at all, insisting they already knew how it ended. Names spread quickly. So did assumptions. In the newsroom of the North Sound Tribune, Maya Alvarez sat hunched forward at her desk, elbows planted, eyes locked on her monitor. At 29, Maya was slim and sharp-featured, with dark hair usually pulled into a loose knot that never stayed neat. She dressed simply, button-down shirts, worn sneakers, not out of style, but because she hated anything that made her feel like she didn't belong where she stood. Years earlier, a hit-and-run that killed her younger brother had taught her something permanent. Truth mattered only if someone bothered to chase it. She didn't trust viral outrage. She trusted data. "Pull every public camera on Rainier Avenue from midnight to 2 a.m., she said without looking up. "Traffic cams, bus cams, storefronts, and get me the officers' names." Her editor hesitated. "We don't even know the whole story yet." "That's why," Maya replied, finally turning. "We don't." Across town, in a concrete maintenance depot that smelled of oil and wet gloves, David Brooks stood among rows of orange safety vests and steel lockers. At 41, David was broad-shouldered with a tired face softened by steady eyes. He'd spent 2 decades working sanitation routes before becoming union lead. Not because he liked speeches, but because no one else wanted to fight City Hall with dirty hands. He had just learned the name on the video was Jamal Carter. Jamal's father had worked sanitation years ago, a quiet man who never complained even when the trucks broke down. David remembered him because he'd once stayed late to help David fix a jammed compactor, no questions asked. David looked around at the workers gathering near the radio, mostly black and brown men with hands permanently roughened by labor. They watched the screen in silence. "Small stop," David said quietly, "but the wound isn't small." No one disagreed. At Harborview Medical Center, Jamal lay on a narrow hospital bed, the room dim except for the glow of monitors. His wrists were bruised purple, swelling just enough to ache with every pulse. His ribs felt tight, each breath a reminder of the pavement. He stared at the ceiling, not really seeing it. Beside him sat Denise Carter, his mother. Denise was 52, medium height, with a gentle posture that belied a lifetime of endurance. Her hair was pulled back in a simple bun streaked with early gray. She worked as a home health aide, a job that had trained her to put others first even when she was exhausted. Losing Jamal's father years earlier to a sudden stroke had carved caution deep into her bones. She held Jamal's hand carefully as if afraid even comfort might hurt him. "If you stay quiet," she said softly, "they'll say nothing happened." Jamal swallowed. "If I don't?" Denise exhaled slowly. "Then they'll come harder." He closed his eyes. Somewhere between pain and shame, something inside him dulled. Not numbness exactly, but a dangerous calm. The kind that came when a line had been crossed and there was no unseeing it. At the precinct, Officer Madison Blake typed steadily, jaw tight, shoulders squared. Her report was clean, efficient, professional. Words like non-compliant and officer safety appeared more than once. She believed every sentence. To Madison, rules existed because chaos did not ask permission. Across the room, Officer Erin Walsh leaned back in her chair, boots crossed at the ankle, fingers flying over the keyboard with casual speed. She hummed softly as she wrote, unbothered by the sting in her shoulder or the swelling on her knuckle. Erin had always believed trouble found people who invited it. And in her version of the story, Jamal had invited plenty. By afternoon, the video was everywhere. By evening, the city was loud. Small groups gathered near bus terminals and grocery stores, voices overlapping, anger simmering. Many were black, some homeless, others shift workers still in uniform. People who were used to being overlooked now found themselves speaking at once. On the third night, near a downtown bus depot, a crowd swelled without planning it. Someone shouted. Someone else answered. A brick flew, glass shattered. Sirens followed. A young man fell, bleeding from the head. Cameras captured everything again. Chaos always filmed better than context. News alerts lit up phones across Seattle. Then came the headline that changed the shape of the conversation entirely. 2 female officers assaulted in alley. Suspect identified as Jamal Carter. The story spread faster than the original video. Maya read it twice, then a third time. Her stomach tightened. The timeline didn't sit right. She pulled up hospital records, police logs, emergency calls. The times overlapped strangely. Injuries described didn't match what she'd seen in the footage. She marked inconsistencies in red, filling a yellow notepad with questions. Outside a convenience store near the alley mentioned in the report, Leon Pops Freeman stood watching police tape flutter in the breeze. Pops's coat was soaked through, his cart parked crookedly beside him. He rubbed his hands together for warmth, eyes following officers as they moved in practiced patterns. He recognized the place. He also recognized lies when he saw them. Across the city, Jamal watched the headline scroll across a muted television in his hospital room. His name sat there, bold and accusing. He felt Denise's hand tighten around his. "I didn't do that," he said quietly. "I know," she replied. But outside that room, belief was already becoming optional. Seattle didn't sleep that night. The rain returned, heavier now, washing sidewalks while arguments burned on. Somewhere between justice and judgment, the city stood balanced on a thin edge, waiting to see which way it would fall. The manhunt began before Jamal Carter understood he had become a fugitive. His photo appeared on television screens across Seattle, cropped from his taxi ID, eyes tired, jaw tight, beneath a banner that pulsed in urgent red. Suspect identified. The word followed him like a shadow. Radios crackled. Sirens braided through the rain. Social media filled the spaces between facts with certainty. Jamal was no longer at home. He moved through back alleys and service corridors, keeping to the edges of the city where the lights thinned and the rain sounded louder than his breath. His hands shook, not with fear alone, but with exhaustion. Every few steps, the memory replayed. Aaron's laugh, Madison's finger inches from his face, the metal closing around his wrists. The night pressed in, heavy and wet, and Seattle felt suddenly unfamiliar, like a place he had only passed through before. He stopped beneath a flickering awning behind a closed hardware store and leaned forward, palms on his knees. His ribs burned when he breathed. He checked his phone once. No calls he could answer, messages he couldn't read without spiraling. He turned it off. Silence felt safer. Across the city, Maya Alvarez worked through the night. She hadn't gone home. At the Tribune newsroom, fluorescent lights washed the color from her face as she compared timestamps, medical intake forms against police call logs. Something didn't line up. The reported severity of the officer's injuries suggested a timeline that conflicted with dispatch records. Not impossible, but improbable. Maya circled times, drew arrows, then pulled the files again. By dawn, she was standing under a concrete overhang near the old bus depot, rain pattering off the edge. That's where she found Leon, Pops, Freeman again. Pops sat on a milk crate with his cart beside him, coat soaked through, beard damp and gray. His posture was patient, his eyes alert. Years on the street had taught him what mattered and what didn't. "I saw it," Pop said without preamble when Maya introduced herself. His voice was low, steady. "I saw them put hands on the kid before anything else." Maya crouched to his level, notebook ready. "You're sure?" Pops nodded. "And I saw someone else. Young white guy, light hoodie. He ran when the shouting started, not toward the street, away." Maya felt the shape of a story change in her hands. She thanked Pops, offered a card. He took it carefully as if paper could bruise. At City Services, David Brooks stood at the head of a folding table, shoulders squared, voice calm despite the room's tension. Workers, sanitation crews, bus drivers, maintenance staff filled the chairs. David had always believed calm could hold a room together. Tonight, it took effort. The news had sharpened people's edges. "We're setting up legal support," David said. "Not protests, support. Bail funds, council lists, de-escalation teams for the neighborhoods." A murmur of agreement passed through the room, mixed with frustration. David saw it on their faces, the fear of being pushed too far, and the anger of being pushed at all. The arrest came that night, fast and loud. Police vehicles boxed in an abandoned warehouse near the waterfront. Floodlights cutting white paths through the rain. Jamal ran, instinct, not guilt. But his foot slipped on slick concrete. He went down hard. Weight crushed his back. Hands forced his arms behind him. The cuffs snapped closed, tighter than before. Cameras were everywhere this time. Jamal's face pressed to the ground, rain pooling near his cheek, the city watching. A week later, the courthouse overflowed. Inside, the air was thick with bodies and breath. The benches filled early, mostly black faces set and silent. Outside, signs lifted and dipped in waves. Self-defense is not a crime across from Back the Blue. The city argued in parallel lines. Jamal sat at the defense table in a borrowed suit that didn't quite fit his shoulders. His wrists still ached when the air turned cold. He kept his eyes forward. Denise Carter sat behind him, back straight, hands folded so tightly her knuckles blanched. She looked smaller here, but her gaze didn't waver. The prosecutor rose. Richard Vaughn was 51, tall, silvering at the temples with a voice that filled space easily. He wore confidence like a tailored jacket. Vaughn believed order required examples, and examples required firmness. The defendant, Vaughn began, poses a threat to public safety. He assaulted 2 officers in the line of duty. We will seek the appropriate charges. Across the aisle, the defense attorney leaned forward. Malcolm Hayes, 48, was lean, dark-skinned, with eyes that missed little. He dressed simply, spoke carefully. Years earlier, a wrongful conviction he couldn't overturn had taught him to listen longer than most. Jamal glanced down at his hands. The bruises had yellowed, but the memory of being diminished stayed fresh. He felt the weight of the room, the expectations, the labels already affixed to his name. Above it all, rain tapped the courthouse windows, steady and unbothered. The judge called for order. The gavel sounded. Outside, the signs dipped again. Inside, the night everything broke settled into record, waiting to be read. The courtroom did not feel like a place for listening. It felt like a place for choosing sides. From the first morning of testimony, the air carried a tension that settled into shoulders and jaws, a low hum of expectation that followed every word. Rain tapped the tall windows in a patient rhythm, as if the city itself were waiting to see which version of events would be allowed to stand. The prosecution went first, methodical and confident. Exhibits appeared on screens: a citation for a minor traffic violation, a clipped segment of body camera footage, a timeline printed cleanly on letterhead. The gaps were framed as accidents. The cuts were framed as coincidence. The story was framed as simple. Jamal Carter resisted. Officers responded. Order was restored. Richard Vaughn paced lightly as he spoke, hands open, voice even. He had the polished presence of a man accustomed to persuading rooms. "We will show," he said, "that the defendant's behavior escalated a routine stop into chaos, and that his later actions contributed to unrest that endangered lives." Jamal sat still, eyes forward. The suit jacket pinched at the shoulders when he breathed. He focused on the grain of the wood table, the small nicks and scratches that told quieter stories than the one being told about him. When the defense rose, the room changed tone. Malcolm Hayes did not pace. He stood close to the lectern, shoulders relaxed, eyes attentive as if he were listening even while speaking. He had the habit of pausing before questions, letting silence do part of the work. Years earlier, a case he lost, despite evidence he believed in, had taught him restraint. He never rushed now. "Officer Walsh," Malcolm said, turning toward Erin Walsh as she took the stand, posture straight, expression neutral. Under the courtroom lights, Erin looked younger than she had on the street, her uniform crisp, her hair immaculate. "You testified that the body camera malfunctioned at a critical moment," Malcolm began. "Yes," Erin replied. "Technical issue." Malcolm tilted his head slightly. "At what exact moment did it malfunction?" Erin hesitated. "During the suspect's resistance." "Which resistance?" Malcolm asked calmly. "The moment he reached for his phone, or after the handcuffs were applied?" A flicker crossed Erin's face. "The struggle happened quickly." Malcolm nodded, as if accepting that. He moved on without pressing, letting the question linger. Next came Madison Blake, rigid and composed, chin lifted. She spoke with certainty, repeating phrases from the report as if repetition itself could harden them into fact. "We followed procedure," she said. "We ensured officer safety." Malcolm displayed photographs on the screen. Jamal's bruised ribs, abrasions on his cheek, wrists darkened with swelling. The room leaned forward. "Is this consistent?" Malcolm asked quietly, "with a compliant suspect?" Madison's jaw tightened. "In volatile situations, thank you," Malcolm said, cutting gently. "No further questions." From the bench, Judge Elaine Mercer watched with an expression practiced into neutrality. At 57, she had a presence that commanded stillness without effort. Tall, silver-haired, eyes sharp but tired. Years on the bench had taught her that truth rarely arrived whole. She struck the gavel more than once that day, not in anger but to keep the room from tearing itself apart. Outside the courthouse, the noise never stopped. News vans idled. Commentators argued into microphones. Signs rose and fell in uneven waves. The city seemed to breathe through megaphones. Inside a small studio apartment across town, Maya Alvarez watched the trial feed on mute, laptop open beside her. She typed steadily, assembling her first investigative piece. Maya had chosen her words with care. No accusations, only questions anchored in timestamps and public records. She believed restraint would protect the work. She believed readers could handle nuance if it was given to them honestly. The article went live just before dusk. Within an hour, it was everywhere. Podcasts dissected it line by line. Cable panels split screens into opposing corners. Headlines hedged. The noise doubled, then tripled. Seattle did not argue about facts anymore. It argued about meaning. At city services, David Brooks fielded calls he never wanted. One of his workers, a quiet man named Caleb Moore, mid-30s, thin, with a habit of keeping his head down, had been jumped walking home from a late shift. No serious injuries, the hospital said, but enough to leave a message. David closed his office door and sat with the phone in his hands, understanding something he had tried to avoid. If this collapsed into spectacle, the people least protected would pay first. Back in the courthouse, the days blurred. Testimony stacked upon testimony. The phrase technical error repeated until it sounded rehearsed. Jamal listened, absorbing each word like weight added to a scale already leaning. On the evening before closing arguments, Malcolm returned to his office later than usual. The building was quiet. The hall lights dimmed. He unlocked his door and noticed a plain envelope resting against the frame, unmarked. No return address, his name written in careful block letters. Inside, a USB drive lay taped to a folded scrap of paper. Look at the alley cam. They forgot one camera. Malcolm did not plug it in immediately. He sat at his desk for a long moment, hands folded, breathing slow. He had learned not to trust surprises, but he had also learned not to ignore them. When he finally inserted the drive, a single file appeared. Grainy footage, a narrow alley, a timestamp that made his pulse quicken. The camera angle was poor, but the moment was clear enough. Movement before the reported assault. A figure in a light hoodie entering the frame, then fleeing. And seconds earlier, another angle, another camera, an unmistakable shove delivered to a handcuffed man. Malcolm leaned back, eyes closed, the weight of it settling. This was not exoneration. Not yet. It was something else. A door. The next morning, the courtroom filled again, unaware of the shift beneath its feet. Judge Mercer called for order. Vaughn rose, prepared to argue inevitability. Jamal adjusted his jacket, the cuffs of his shirt brushing scars not yet healed. In the gallery, Denise Carter clasped her hands and prayed. Not for victory, but for clarity. Outside, rain returned, thin and steady, washing the steps where people stood waiting. Inside, two truths faced each other across polished wood, each insisting it belonged to the law. And somewhere between them, a forgotten camera waited to be seen. The USB did not make a sound when Malcolm Hayes slid it into his laptop, but the room seemed to tighten around the click. The footage loaded slowly, frame by frame, the way truth sometimes does when it has been forced to wait. What appeared first was the back of a neighborhood grocery store, its delivery door scarred by years of use, a narrow alley lit by a single buzzing bulb. Then movement, fast, unmistakable. A young white man in a light-colored hoodie burst into view and ran, disappearing past the camera's edge just as two figures in uniform rushed after him. The timestamp aligned precisely with the moment the officers claimed they were attacked. Malcolm leaned closer. He scrubbed backward a few seconds and froze the image. Another angle, another camera. Jamal, hands cuffed behind his back, head turned, rain sliding down his face, and Madison's open palm striking him across the cheek. There was no confusion here, no blur that could be argued into ambiguity. It was a sequence. Cause and effect. Malcolm brought the evidence to the trial court the next morning. He did not grandstand, he did not accuse, he followed procedure, filing the motion as cleanly as possible. The answer came back just as clean, just as cold. Too late. The record was closed. Rules were rules. Judge Elaine Mercer met Malcolm's eyes for a moment longer than necessary before denying the motion. Her expression carried something like regret, but regret did not move calendars. The denial did not stop the footage from moving elsewhere. It moved through journalists' hands, through lawyers' phones, through a city already primed to listen. By dusk, the narrative had outrun the courtroom. What had been framed as a single confrontation now looked like a thread tugging at something larger. Calls came in waves. Civil rights groups, oversight boards, legislators. The pressure did not ask permission. 2 days later, the state's higher court announced it would review the matter. The language was careful, almost antiseptic. Credible indications of withheld evidence and potential systemic misuse of force. But everyone understood what it meant. The case had climbed. The hearing room for the higher court felt different from the trial court, smaller, quieter, stripped of spectacle. Wood polished to a muted sheen. No cameras allowed. The air held the stillness of a place where interruptions were unwelcome. Judge William Hargrove entered without ceremony. At 68, he was tall but spare, his gray hair cut close, his robe hanging loosely from narrow shoulders. His eyes were pale and steady, the eyes of a man who had watched lies burn themselves out over decades. A former prosecutor, he carried no affection for defense theatrics and no patience for institutional arrogance. His reputation came from a simple habit. He asked the question again when he did not like the answer. The representatives from the police department sat together, backs straight, expressions neutral. Their counsel spoke first, measured and cautious, explaining technical failures, procedural constraints, the limits of human memory. Hargrove listened without moving. Then he asked his first question. "You testified that the body cameras malfunctioned at a critical moment," he said, voice level. "Yet this court has reviewed footage from a private camera within 20 yards that continued recording without interruption. Why was it not produced?" Silence stretched. Counsel offered explanations, ownership, discovery scope, oversight. None landed. Hargrove nodded once. "We will not proceed on explanations alone," he said. "This court orders a comprehensive review." The order was broader than anyone expected. Not just the stop, not just the alley, a look back at prior complaints, internal notes, patterns that had been quietly filed and forgotten. The kind of review institutions fear because it replaces anecdotes with numbers. The results arrived in stacks. Complaints marked unsubstantiated. Warnings issued and withdrawn. Language repeated, attitude, tone, perception of threat, attached disproportionately to black men. Madison Blake and Aaron Walsh appeared more than once, their names threaded through the paperwork like a refrain, nothing that had forced action. everything that should have. Outside the court, Maya Alvarez published her second piece. She did not lead with Jamal. She led with the pattern, charts, timelines, a map of stops clustered by neighborhood and time of day. The headline cut cleanly. Not an incident. A model. It landed harder than outrage because it invited readers to count. Witnesses began to surface. With the court's order came protections. Pops was relocated to a temporary shelter and assigned a caseworker. He looked uncomfortable in clean clothes, but his eyes were clear. "I'll tell it straight," he said to Maya, to Malcolm, to anyone who asked. "I always do." David Brooks coordinated logistics quietly. He knew how easily good intentions fell apart when people missed shifts or lost wages. The union covered transport, meals, child care. Men and women who had never set foot in a courthouse found themselves walking through metal detectors with their heads up. David kept his voice low, his instructions practical. Calm, he believed, was contagious if modeled long enough. Jamal waited. The waiting room assigned to him on the day of the higher court hearing was spare. Gray chairs, a table with outdated magazines. He sat with his hands folded, breathing evenly. For the first time in weeks, he did not stare at the ceiling. He watched people pass the frosted glass and imagined a future that was not defined by a single night. He did not excuse what had followed. The broken glass, the injuries, the fear that had rippled outward. He understood consequences. What he sought was proportion. Denise sat beside him, her posture softer now, as if the weight had shifted slightly off her shoulders. She did not smile. She simply held his arm. When Hargrove delivered his findings, he did so without flourish. Evidence had been withheld. Force had been applied improperly. Oversight had failed quietly and repeatedly. He ordered a full reinvestigation and referred disciplinary matters to an independent body. The room did not erupt. It exhaled. The city absorbed the news in fragments. Some felt vindicated, others felt betrayed. Most felt tired. That evening, rain returned to Seattle in a steady curtain, rinsing sidewalks and signage alike. Jamal stood under the eaves outside the courthouse, listening to it. He knew the road ahead remained long. He also knew that something had shifted. Not forgiveness, not victory, but visibility. For the first time since Rainier Avenue, he felt seen as more than a headline. Seattle woke to a rare, generous blue. The rain had stepped aside, leaving the air clean and bright, as if the city itself wanted to inhale before speaking. Sunlight cut across the courthouse steps and lingered there, warming stone that had carried too much weight for too long. People gathered early, not with chants or megaphones, but with quiet purpose. This day asked for listening. Inside, the higher court convened with a restraint that felt deliberate. Wood gleamed softly. Papers lay aligned. Judge William Hargrove entered without flourish. His gait measured, his face unreadable. He had the look of a man who had learned to keep his feelings private, so his questions could remain sharp. When he sat, the room stilled. Jamal Carter sat at the defense table in a suit that now fit him better, not because it had changed, but because he stood straighter in it. He was still lean, still quiet, but the tremor in his hands had faded. He breathed slowly, shoulders squared, eyes forward. Weeks of waiting had taught him patience, and patience had taught him something else. Fear lost its edge when faced directly. Behind him, Denise Carter folded her hands in her lap. She had chosen a simple navy dress, her hair smoothed back carefully. Denise was not tall, not imposing, but there was a steadiness in her posture that came from years of caring for others without applause. Today, she allowed herself a small hope, guarded and precise. Judge Hargrove began to read. He did not raise his voice. He did not soften it either. Each finding landed with clarity, not drama. Jamal had committed a minor traffic violation. That fact stood. It mattered because truth did not benefit from erasure. Then Hargrove moved to what mattered more. The detention, he said, exceeded lawful bounds. The use of force was unjustified. The evidence presented against Jamal had been incomplete, selectively edited, and in parts improperly withheld. The heavy charges did not meet the standard required to stand. The room held its breath. Hargrove paused, allowing the words to settle. He acknowledged the harm that followed: the broken glass, the injuries, the fear that spread when trust broke. Anger, he said, could explain behavior, but could not excuse harm. Accountability had to travel both directions, or it failed its purpose. Then the orders came. Jamal would receive an administrative penalty for the traffic violation and complete a community mediation program focused on repair rather than punishment. No incarceration, no felony record. The gavel struck once, clean. Madison Blake and Aaron Walsh were named next. The court ordered their immediate suspension, removal from patrol duties, and referral to an independent disciplinary board and external investigators for abuse of authority. The words were precise, unavoidable. Careers shifted in the space of a paragraph. Finally, the department itself. Mandated reforms, transparent camera protocols, clear limits on use of force, a complaint system that could not be quietly shelved. Independent review, ongoing. When Judge Hargrove finished, he closed the folder and looked out over the room. "This court does not choose sides," he said. "It chooses process. When process is honored, outcomes follow." Outside, the steps filled with people who did not rush. Two groups faced each other across a wide ribbon of sunlight: those who had backed the officers, those who had backed Jamal. No stones flew, no chants rose. There were sighs instead, the sound of tension releasing without ceremony. A few people nodded, as if recognizing something they had forgotten how to name. Denise stood and wrapped her arms around Jamal. He held her carefully, as though strength could be gentle if it tried. When they parted, Jamal scanned the crowd and found Leon "Pops" Freeman standing off to the side, hat pulled low, beard neatly trimmed for once. Pops looked thinner in clean clothes, but his eyes were steady. Jamal crossed the space between them and stopped, unsure how close to stand. He lowered his head slightly. "Thank you," he said. Pops shook his head, slow and certain. "Don't thank me," he replied. "Thank yourself for not going quiet." Nearby, Maya Alvarez adjusted the camera hanging from her neck. She did not photograph the embrace. She turned instead and framed the courthouse bulletin board where a single page had been posted: "Independent review ordered." Maya was slim, dark-haired, her expression focused rather than satisfied. She knew headlines faded. Systems did not, unless someone kept looking. Across the plaza, David Brooks waited until the crowd thinned before approaching Jamal. David's broad frame filled the space easily, his voice low and practical. He handed Jamal a small card. "Night driver support," he said. "In-car cameras, legal hotline, check-ins. Come back to work when you're ready. But not alone." Jamal turned the card over in his hands. He glanced across the street where his taxi waited, newly detailed, sunlight catching the windshield. It looked ordinary again, and that felt like a gift. As the afternoon wore on, people drifted away. Conversations softened. A woman with a stroller paused to read the posted order. A man in a Union jacket took a photo and sent it to someone who needed proof that change could be written down. Jamal stood for a moment longer, listening to the city. He knew bruises healed. He also knew memories did not fade on command. What mattered was that the city had heard. And this time, listening had become rules, and rules had become consequences. It was not perfect. It was not finished. But it was the way it should have been. The story concludes with a lesson for us. Justice is not proven by who holds power, but by who is willing to listen when power is questioned. Silence protects the system, not the people. Change begins the moment an ordinary person refuses to accept humiliation as fate and chooses truth over fear, knowing the price and still paying it. Jamal Carter never wanted to be a symbol. He only wanted to be treated as a human being. And when the city listened, not the loudest voices but the silent truths, it remembered something it had almost forgotten: that justice is not about winning or losing. It is about restoring balance, dignity, and the courage to say, "This is what should have happened."